Welcome to China in the News, where we dive into the stories shaping the US China relations. I'm Christine, your producer and co host. And as always, I'm joined by renowned China scholar Doug Guthrie, my co host. Today, we're exploring the aftermath of TikTok ban. Before we dive in, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to stay updated to our latest episode. Doug, let's get started.
So good
TikTok.
to be here,
Oh,
Christine.
TikTok chose to go dark for 14 hours. Why do you think they made that move? Is this a game of chicken with the Biden administration, forcing them to clarify their position?
So, I mean, I think it's a great question because, we have to just sort of read from the sidelines and see what's actually happening. But there is clearly a very complex political dynamic that's happening in this process. And one of the things that I think is fascinating is that there are, political actors who are trying to figure out exactly what they're going to be doing to make this whole thing work. And so in this case, I think, it's been a fascinating game of chicken because we've seen uh, uh, the CEO of TikTok, Shou Zhu, be, sort of talking through with different players about what it really was that he was trying to think through and what he was trying to do. And then, of course, there was the case with the DC Circuit, and then the Supreme Court case. And as you and I have discussed, I wrote one of the amicus curiae briefs for them, which Covington ended up not using. And so there's clearly been a lot of analysis on what it is that should be happening and what it is to do. There is also the really interesting game that's happening with President Trump, right? Because President Trump was an individual who first called for the TikTok ban 4 years ago, more than 4 years ago now, I guess. Um, and, and then he also has found that he's very good on social media, and probably TikTok helped him get elected. Because I forget what the numbers are. You probably remember them better than I do, but just of how many views he's had on TikTok and how many, I mean, it's sort of an amazing dynamic. And as he got elected, once he got back into his position and was not just trying to curry favor with the political party and the MAGA group that he's really currying favor with in the election process, we've then seen a twist, right? So for a while, he's talking about 60% tariffs in China and how China is to blame for, all of the loss of American jobs. And, next thing you know, Elon Musk has paid $250 million to help him get elected. And Elon Musk is, as you and I have discussed, is deeply, deeply tied to China. And so there's just this interesting dance going on where, on the one hand, you have President Trump currying favor with the people who are anti-China people, and you have this sort of rise of this movement, which got overwhelming support in the U.S. Congress, and again support in the judicial system with the D.C. Circuit, and then a 9-0 decision in the Supreme Court. And now you have Trump coming back and saying like, actually, you know what? Maybe TikTok's a good thing. Like maybe we should figure out a joint venture. And I think you and I will get to the point about what a joint venture means, but clearly there's a dance, and it's a dance between the players that are engaging with this, including the CEO of TikTok, but also the leaders of ByteDance. Um, and as you and I have discussed before, I think it's a very, very superficial dance because people don't really look deeply into how ByteDance is structured and what the relationship between TikTok and the Chinese government actually is empirically. But it's very clear that, tens of billions of dollars are at stake. And so, there's a dance going on, and it's one that President Trump is engaging in.
That's right. The service was actually quickly restored after 14 hours. TikTok even included a message with a nod to President Trump for his effort working through the issues. However, that's the services part. Apple and Google have chosen not to make any of the apps available in App Store. Just so you know, all the shutdown isn't just TikTok. It includes all the ByteDance applications, including CapCut, the video editor, and Lemonade, which is another social media app. So, in fact, there's a cottage industry cropping up selling iPhones with TikTok pre-installed, and I've seen $10,000 listed on eBay for an iPhone 12. So anyway, quite a set of entrepreneurs.
It's amazing. I mean, it's so again, this is a fascinating time, and to kind of take a step back to the kind of issues that you and I like to talk about, this is a very important issue because it's about U.S.-China relations and trade, and serious issues that are at stake. But it's also just this sort of fascinating moment in watching social media and watching the ways in which different players have to be um, committing to and following the law that's being set out, right? And so you mentioned Tim Cook and Apple and the App Store. Um, you know, these people are business people who are very careful, and they do not want to get caught in the middle of having said, well, it's unclear what's really happening. Like the United States government and the D.C. Circuit and the Supreme Court said that the legislation that was passed by the United States government is legal, and they supported this legislative movement. And so Tim Cook is not going to be caught in the middle of just with this dance going on between the case and then the the ban, and then Donald Trump saying, well, it's okay, maybe we'll figure out how to make this work, and there's a 75-day reprieve on this. Tim Cook and Google are not going to be caught in the middle of this. There's not.
Well, that's interesting because at a recent panel in Davos, World Economic Forum, Bill Ford, the CEO of General Atlantic, one of the investors, and ByteDance directors, mentioned a deal might soon be finalized. He indicated that ByteDance is actively negotiating with U.S. regulators to address their concern while maintaining some level of Chinese ownership. Do you think any deal allowing Chinese investor to maintain ownership could satisfy U.S. government's demand for divestiture?
Well, so it's a great question, Christine, and my hope is that the answer is yes, because I think, as you and I have discussed in previous episodes, we first of all, if we're going to have responsible capitalism, we need clear empirical evidence about what's actually going on, not just rumor and innuendo and people saying that the Chinese government is capturing the data and manipulating the algorithms. Like, there's no evidence for this, none. And as you and I have also discussed, and as you well know very well, and you mentioned uh, the Atlantic Council, but there are, Sequoia Capital and others, like this company is 60% foreign owned, and TikTok doesn't exist in China, right? The founders of ByteDance have been very, very careful to have a distinction between the TikTok side of the house, which is the international piece, and the Douyin side of the house, which is the China piece, right? And so it just seems to me that the ByteDance founders and the owners and the investors these are smart business people, and they're gonna come up with something, and they're gonna get something done. TikTok is still gonna exist, and in my opinion, it is still going to operate in the United States. It's just unclear what the deal is going to look like. That being said, I still think there's a really strong argument to be made about how responsible we are in the legislative side of the house. The one other piece that you and I have discussed before, but I would just want to reiterate it for our listeners here. China is in a much more powerful position than the United States is in this case. There are tens of billions of dollars that are at stake for TikTok and ByteDance, but China is also in charge of some of the most powerful, the operations of some of the most powerful companies in the world, like Apple and Tesla. And so, there are cards to be played here. And so when we hear Donald Trump putting up his hand and saying, like, I'm going to talk to President Xi and we'll figure out what we're going to do, a deal's going to get done. It will.
Well, to be frank, like you said, ByteDance is currently 60% foreign owned, and President Trump is proposing a 50-50 joint venture for TikTok US. So, anyway, it's not too far off. And you also said that a deal would be done. Any idea what it might look like?
Well, I don't know exactly what it would look like. I've watched the videos and heard President Trump talking about this. my personal view, and forgive me for saying this, but it was a little embarrassing because he just sounded like he was uninformed. Like the idea of like, well, we should just have a 50-50 joint venture, and there are these things called joint ventures. Have you heard of those? And come on, dude. Like there is, first of all, again, just to go back to the empirical nature of this situation, ByteDance is already 60% foreign owned, right? And so like then what is the argument? Like, if you want a joint venture deal and you want to just add up like the US ownership through all of the investors that are there, like we're already pretty close to that. But it sounds like what he's talking about is a joint venture deal in which a new joint venture is done. Now, what was a little ambiguous as he was talking about it was, are you talking about the United States government and a joint venture deal with it? It just was very confusing to me because obviously, like that would be a strange thing because, we're we're blaming ByteDance and TikTok for having Chinese government investiture in this. And so probably he was just talking about a joint venture deal. But again, foreign ownership is already the majority ownership of ByteDance. So it was very confusing to me. And it just sounded uninformed.
I agree. Before the potential TikTok ban gained traction, many creators actually migrated to Xiaohongshu, a Chinese app that's often described as a mixture of Pinterest and Instagram. Majority of its audience actually female, and from it started out with tier one cities like Beijing and Shanghai, sharing their travel, their food, uh, adventures. So the name Xiaohongshu actually translates to red little red book. You will find in the app store as red note. But little red book actually refers to Mao Zedong's famous book of quotations.
Right.
Um, what's particularly striking is that most creators skip US platforms like Instagram and YouTube altogether, citing frustration with just intrusive ads and data privacy issues they encounter with Facebook themselves. Well, some creators even noted while they try to post videos, the same videos on these platforms, they didn't quite experience the same level of engagement as on TikTok. So, interestingly, getting back to Little Red Book, when they sign up for Xiaohongshu, subscribers have to agree to align to Chinese Communist Party values. So, from the Chinese US government's perspective, doesn't that feel like a game of whack-a-mole? You just ban TikTok and then another app, Xiaohongshu, takes over.
Well, yes, it does seem like whack-a-mole, and I love your framing of it that way, except again, this is why I think we need legislators and judges to be intelligent about what it is that they're doing, because make no mistake about it, like China has been very good at the social media game, and this is not just about TikTok and ByteDance and Xiaohongshu. This is about Alibaba and Tencent, and like China has been great at innovation in this space. And so the idea that we're just going to ban TikTok and suddenly the world's going to be safe because everybody will go to Facebook and Instagram. Well, as you pointed out, like a lot of people suddenly were migrating to Xiaohongshu. And here's the ultimate irony to your point. Xiaohongshu is an allusion to the Cultural Revolution, right? And Mao's Little Red Book. Like it's quite an ironic thing. So if we think that okay, banning TikTok, we're going to save, Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook and Instagram, and it'll be great. The world is a lot more complex than that, right? And you're not going to be able to stop people from using Chinese apps. Like that's just not going to happen. And so again, I just think legislators and judges and the presidents should be a little more strategic and intelligent in how they think about these issues. And, like if we're worried about some things, like let's have serious conversations about what it means to protect data and to protect privacy and to make sure that we're getting empirical evidence about when we have allegations about these issues. And so I just think we've been very, very superficial and thoughtless about this.
Well, let's take a step back. How did the ban originally come about in 2020?
Well, I mean, there were discussions about this issue, and then President Trump was being somewhat aggressive about the question of like whether or not TikTok should be banned and whether or not the Chinese government was using um, the data to influence algorithms to target. And so, there was a legislative push for this, right? And there was a very, very wide bipartisan support for this, right? And so, the law was passed, and and eventually this became the law of the land, and it was, TikTok took it to the courts, and they lost to the DC Circuit, 3-0 or 0-3, and then it was put up to the Supreme Court, and then the idea was that, if the Supreme Court upheld the ban, that would be, by the end of the Biden administration, so January 19th, 2025, the ban would be upheld, and that happened, and it was passed, and so it's, I think, a very, very, um, just not a great time for U.S. capitalism. Now, as you probably know, I'm sure you know, because you're as up on the information to these things as I am, there have been all of these videos and musings recently about how, Mark Zuckerberg paid 7.6 billion or 7.6 million to, work on lobbying to get TikTok banned. And, I don't know what the truth of all of those issues are, but there's definitely a discussion about the ways in which the tech industry was losing the battle against TikTok and decided to go after them.
If you actually talk to any of the folks from who works at Meta, Facebook, they certainly TikTok is on top of mind, and just like Snapchat was on top of mind a decade ago. So Mark Zuckerberg has been a vocal critic of TikTok, and like you said, during meetings with officials and lawmakers, Zuckerberg raised concerns about TikTok's connection to China, and he argued many times that TikTok is a competitive threat, and then he tried really hard to eliminate it. So, like, anything else you can share about kind of the role that Zucker played in the trajectory of this ban?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really interesting and important question here again, because in the world of free market capitalism and competition, you know, we have built our economy on the notion that firms need legislative rules and creative processes to really kind of compete against each other. But if you're within the boundaries of competition, you know, whoever's better has a better product it should win. And so the idea that we also live in a society in America where if you have a lot of money, you can start to lobby and you can pay legislators a lot, whether it's 250 million to get them elected or 7.6 million to lobby people to get your competition outlawed or banned. I just think it's not a good look for America. And so, the best look would be to learn from each other and to compete against each other and to figure out how to do what TikTok is doing so well. And so I just think it's and we've also seen that the sort of about face of Zuckerberg in terms of, the ways in which, not just on TikTok, but also the ways in which he's talking about, fact checking and a number of other things. There's a lot of currying favor with the new Trump administration and with Congress on, you know, whatever they need to do to get in good with the powers that be.
Finally, at the time of this recording, TikTok it's on the day 5 of the 75-day retreat, a reprieve. We'll have to keep watching for the latest development. And what should viewers keep in mind as the situation evolves?
Well, so here again, let me take a step back, or at least answer this question on two levels. So one is what we need to think about in terms of just the app, right? And as you know, I have kids, and my 14-year-old son loves TikTok, and like he's anxious to get it working again. And Dad, should I be on Xiaohongshu or um, and so there's just the user experience, right? Which I think,
Just to add that he deleted his TikTok, so he has no access to it on his current phone.
yeah,
We might entertain him with a $10,000 iPhone 12 on eBay.
maybe I'll do that, but maybe not. But But the larger issue, as you know, Christine, that I'm more obsessed with is not just what the user experience is in social media, but the larger issue is what this means for U.S.-China relations and global trade, right? And so, like, I think the really interesting thing right now is what is the dance that's going to be happening, okay? And so what is going to be the outcome of the Trump administration's push to get a 50% joint venture with a company that's already 60% owned? Um, but the bigger issue is we're in a risky situation in terms of the exposure of companies like Tesla and Apple. And being in a trade war with China is, I think we're in a dangerous position. And so I would just tell viewers to just don't just think of this as a social media issue, but think of this as a U.S.-China relations and global trade issue, right? And this is really where I think that things get really important for what's happening for the two largest economies in the world.
Well, speaking of trade, we should do an episode on tariffs.
I would love that. I would.
Um,
I
that's all
think
for today's China in the News. Thank you so much for joining us to unpack this complicated story. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Your engagement really helps bring these stories to a wider audience. Until next time, I'm Christine, joined by Doug Guthrie, and this has been China in the News. See you soon. Thank you.
See you soon.